Resolving the Contradictions in Kejawen, the contribution of Hindu philosophy. Welcome to you. I've already indicated in previous vlogs that I get stuck between the veils of Kejawen, between materialism and pure consciousness. And you could see this between the paranormal and one's will. And this leads to contradictions in my arguments, which I've apologised for in the past, while sticking with the contradictions. And I've always believed that this is due to my difficulty in suppressing the ego. And in part, this is a reasonable explanation. The other thing that's been happening to me recently is that I've been dealing with trolls, especially those with dogmatic religious views. What I call evangelists, or incorrectly, but I'm searching for a better word, and that is messianics. But I now want to share with you some of my latest thoughts, which are inspired by Hindu philosophy. Now, this is part of a new section to the magic of Java, called The Real Magic of Java. In this new section, I'm going to focus on real people performing what they believe to be real magic in Java. I'll attempt to explain some of the elements of this Javanese magic, particularly what I describe as the Kejawen elements. However, I need to warn you that inevitably my explanations will be partial. Maybe sometimes some elements of what I say will be incorrect, for which I profusely apologise. But this reflects the oral tradition of magic in Java, the mystery, and at times, I have to admit, subterfuge surrounding the practice of magic in Java. Please accept my apologies, but I do hope you enjoy this new section. Dogmatic religious beliefs. I have in the past, and to a large degree still do, trace the growth of dogmatic religious beliefs to the Christian Enlightenment. We need to understand that such beliefs remain a minority within both Christianity and Islam, despite being very vocal and claiming to be at the majority. In fact, often claiming to be true Christian or true Islam. In the West, people see this as not only the dominant view in Islam, but as defining Islam, when nothing could be further from the truth. And as I've said before, it's always loudest at the shallow end of the swimming pool. And I think this explains why so many Christians attempt to define my beliefs as a Muslim and then to pillory me for these beliefs that I myself find repugnant. So this is the typical tactic of a narcissist. I'm not saying that all evangelists are narcissists, but certainly at times they behave as though they are. Such beliefs are a part of materialist science, in the same way that you could argue that capitalism is. Which is why such beliefs fall short of criticising the materialist world and see the creation of how God wanted us to live as coming from selective reading and interpretations of the scriptures. Indeed, it's their understanding of their scriptures is based on a legalistic interpretation. In Islam, this is developed through jurisprudence, which is something that they cling on to with such great fervour. And this leads people to believe that they have the right to judge and punish others, something which I've stated before, but it's a complete anathema to my own beliefs. Indeed, I see it as shirk, because it's acting in a godlike manner. Another way of seeing this is that there are only two philosophies: those which confirm and inflate the ego, and those which rise above it. I'm about to talk about Hindu philosophy, and of course that's a shorthand, because what is Hinduism? What meaning does it have? I mean, it's really a conception of the British Raj in India to describe a whole series of practices and philosophies of the people of that part of the world. So I suppose the first thing to say is Hinduism a religion? And I think that's debatable. Is Hinduism unitary? No, it most certainly isn't. So even if we agree that Hinduism is a religion, then maybe it's not a single religion. It's certainly not a set of unifying beliefs. And indeed, I'm going on to argue that it is purposely contradictory. So in the West, we have the idea that it's a polytheistic religion, and some followers may well be polytheistic, but that's far too simplistic. And indeed, in order to practice in Indonesia, then Hindus have to at least publicly acknowledge that they're monotheistic. So that goes completely against the grain of what we see Hinduism in the West. So please, I'm using the words Hinduism in the way that a Westerner would, and Hindu philosophy in the way that a Westerner would, as a shorthand for a whole group of philosophies and a whole group of beliefs that originate in and around the Indian subcontinent. Now, the other thing that I need to say to you is that there is this somewhat false idea that the Balinese are Hindus and the rest of Indonesia are Muslim. Well, most of Eastern Indonesia, or most of Eastern Indonesia, does not have a Muslim majority. A lot of it would be Christian. There are Hindus in Java. The other thing is that the Balinese are really originally Javanese. And, there's the misconception that Hinduism came from India, as did Buddhism, which are probably true to most of Indonesia. But it's probably true that the biggest spread of Islam came from Indians, to a lesser extent Chinese, and only a minor extent from Arab traders. And the biggest mass conversion was actually done by the Dutch imperialists, because the Hindus fought to the death, so they encouraged the Javanese to convert to Islam. Those who didn't convert went to Bali. So the Balinese are really Javanese. And through Kejawen, the beliefs and practices, certainly of East and Central Java and Bali, are very similar. It's true that the Balinese are becoming more like Indian Hindus as time goes on, and perhaps the Javanese are becoming more like Arab Muslims as time goes on. But that's largely pressure from the outside world, and also pressure to conform, in as much as everybody has to have an official language, an official religion. And Kejawen isn't one of those. So if you say you're Hindu, you sort of conform to a worldview of Hinduism, as do Muslims conform to a worldview of Islam. Hindu philosophy. Hindu philosophy embraces the contradictions that I found so problematic. Because embracing contradictions, we can become closer to God. God cannot be understood by the reductionist principles of the Enlightenment, collapsing understanding to clearly defined principles. But by freeing ourselves from such constraints, we become closer to God. Paradox is the portal through which transcendence is reached. Embracing contradictions allows us to go beyond the mind and its constraint, not rejecting contradiction, but suspending reason and logic to develop profound wisdom, to experience God firsthand. My problems with these contradictions is natural, because the mind requires a certain amount of coherence to keep us grounded. So many times I've felt myself leaving the material reality, but clutching on to something material, lest I go completely mad. Indeed, I've argued that my Islamic faith is often the thing that keeps me grounded. But Hindu philosophy is about striking the balance between contradiction and coherence. And as I have discovered, so is Kejawen, but probably through a much more materialist appreciation. Adhikar. Adhikar is the spiritual advancement of the follower. So Kanishtha Adhikari is one with a low level of tolerance for contradiction. They require a simplistic set of principles. Things to them are black and white. There's an emphasis on rules and regulations. Hence the preoccupation with what some call Sharia. They over-rationalise God, condensing truth to fit their understanding, or misinterpretation of the scriptures to support their worldview. Obsessing over external ideas, leading to extreme dogma, sometimes called fundamentalism, which misses the nature of God altogether. Spiritual principles feeding their ego, attempting to conquer God by believing that they understand the nature of God. So they define what they don't understand, i.e. occult, as satanic and evil, and state that they want to save our souls, without having explored what their own soul is, or understanding the evil within themselves. These are the people that I call messianics or evangelists. Mahadamaya Adhikari are the ones who need a degree of logic to make sense. So I keep getting pulled back to this level, but they are open to mystery. They understand that knowledge is limited, something that I've said many times, that explanations can only take us so far and cannot be perfectly defined. They understand how their philosophy shapes their experience of God, but as they develop, they know to release certain philosophical principles. So they have an intuition as to when philosophy inspires them and when it's preventing them from becoming closer to God. Uttama Adhikari does not require a philosophy for their personal development. Someone who is beyond philosophy, the guru or the hermit, if you like, because they have experienced the truth that is beyond all philosophy. Something that I myself have found glimpses of in this light of love and bliss that I speak about. Freed from the materialist world, as indeed Buddhists seek to become, they're immersed in spiritual realization. They may conform to philosophical principles or not, because the closest of God is the only thing that matters, or the light, as I call it. They're therefore free from all dogma. Like Parcano, I often speak in philosophical terms for the benefit of others. In particular, our reference to the paranormal, when we both believe all is consciousness. So in healing others, we will speak of the paranormal, we will speak of external influences, because we know this will help people to heal themselves. But we know we have no real power, only to suggest to people that they can heal themselves, because all is ultimately consciousness. Science, philosophy and theology. You may have heard me say this before, but we can see all science as a philosophy. I would also now argue that we can see all theology as a philosophy, despite their claims to be irrefutable. So, you will always hear when you criticise science, science is neutral. But of course, such things are only irrefutable if we accept the constraints of their worldview. So these trolls I speak of will attempt to get me into arguments that they define, and therefore their answers are defined. So particularly religious trolls will quote Al-Quran or the Bible. They will quote hadiths as though these are logical arguments which are irrefutable. And if I stray outside of it, then I'm accused of not being a Muslim. But in order to become closer to God, we have to escape this trap. And that includes the trap of the fetishism with the scriptures and jurisprudence. Now, I'm not rejecting the scriptures. I'm not rejecting jurisprudence. I'm simply saying that we need to move beyond it. So this means that there is no external evil, only states of mind which we need to free ourselves from in our daily jihad. Evil exists because we failed to conquer ourselves. So you've heard me say before that I'm ambivalent as to whether Satan and evil actually exist. And I think ultimately I'm saying they don't. Because they're simply constructs which allow us to remove the need to confront our own demons or the ego. Put another way, and something that I've said before, and that is there is no evil, only an absence of light. So if you shine a light into the darkness disappears. So yes, evil and Satan are constructs which allow some of us to understand our world, allow some of us to understand our religion, but we need to also understand the limitations of such constructs. Well, I really hope you've enjoyed this, because these are real events I can't say how regularly I'm going to be adding to this subsection, because I don't know how often they're going to occur. But I would imagine that they'll be at least every couple of months, maybe monthly. Now, if you'd like to know when that's going to be, please subscribe and hit the button, and you'll get information on when new ones are released. I'd love you to make comments and ask questions, and if you do, I'll attempt to answer them as honestly as I can. I promise you that there's no attempt on this channel, or this part of this channel, of me. There'll be no attempt by me at any type of subterfuge. I'll try to be as honest and open as I possibly can be. Inevitably, there will be some of you who disagree with my interpretation, and we can agree to disagree. But what you're seeing is real stuff here. What I'd love you to do, if you enjoyed this, is look at my other sections. Particularly, I've written novels about magic in Java, and they contain much more information in them, especially me trying to understand the theories of magic, the psychology of it, and I try and intersperse them with a sort of spiritual dimension. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and God bless you.